Tuesday night dinners were sacred in our home, a ritual of normalcy I clung to like religion. Until the evening my son's new friend looked at my husband and said 7 words that detonated my life. "Your husband is my dad too." The silence that followed was deafening. Some truths arrive like thieves, stealing everything you thought was certain. I'd spent years building the perfect suburban fortress, teaching literature by day, playing devoted wife and mother by night. Now I stood in the smoking ruins, watching my husband stammer excuses while a 13-year-old boy accidentally revealed the man behind the mask. They say when your life falls apart, you either break or transform. What they don't tell you is that sometimes you do both. And from those ashes rises someone unexpected, someone who finally understands that the most dangerous woman in any room is the one who has nothing left to lose. Just before we get back to it, I'd love to know where you're watching from today, and if you're enjoying these stories, make sure you're subscribed. I used to believe I knew every inch of my life. Every corner, every shadow. Funny how certainty can be such a fragile thing. My name is Eloise Winters. I'm 39, teach literature at Westlake High, and until last Tuesday, I thought I had the kind of marriage people envied. Not perfect, nothing real ever is, but solid. Something built to last. The kitchen timer chimed as I pulled a lasagna from the oven, the rich tomato scent filling our modest suburban home. Through the window, I could see my husband Callum mowing the lawn, his sleeves rolled up despite the cooling September air. Methodical straight lines across our yard, that was Callum. Precise. Dependable. Or so I thought. "Mom, is it okay if someone comes over?" My son Jude appeared in the doorway, phone in hand, shifting his weight from one foot to another. At 13, he was all angles and uncertainty, caught in that awkward space between boy and teenager. "Someone." I raised an eyebrow, setting the hot dish on the counter. "A friend from school. Kylon. We're partners for the science project." I almost dropped the oven mitts. Not because there was anything wrong with having company, but because Jude rarely brought anyone home. He'd always been selective about friendships, preferring solitude and his sketchbooks to most people his age. "Of course," I said, trying to mask my surprise. "He's welcome to stay for dinner." Jude's face brightened. "Thanks. He's actually outside waiting to see if it's okay." 20 minutes later, our kitchen table had a 4th place setting, and I was meeting Kylon Thorne for the first time. He was slightly shorter than Jude, with warm brown skin and thoughtful eyes that seemed to take in everything. There was something deliberate about his movements, a careful politeness that made him seem older than 13. "Thank you for having me, Mrs. Winters," he said, accepting the glass of lemonade I offered. His voice was quiet but clear. "Call me Eloise," I replied, noticing how he glanced around our kitchen with subtle curiosity. "Jude says you're working on a science project together?" "Yes, ma'am. It's about sustainable energy." He smiled, revealing a slight gap between his front teeth. "Jude has the best ideas." My son actually blushed at the compliment. That's when I knew this friendship was something special. Callum came in from the yard then, wiping sweat from his forehead. "Something smells amazing," he announced, then noticed our guest. "Oh, hello there." "Dad, this is Kylon," Jude said. "He's staying for dinner." I watched as Callum extended his hand. "Nice to meet you, Kylon. Any friend of Jude's is welcome here." For a brief moment, so brief I almost missed it, something flickered across Kylon's face. A recognition? Confusion? Then it was gone, replaced by that same polite smile as he shook my husband's hand. Dinner began normally enough. We passed dishes around, talked about school, laughed at Callum's jokes about his coworkers. Kylon complimented my cooking, taking seconds of lasagna with genuine enthusiasm. "This is better than restaurant food," he said, and I felt a warm glow of maternal pride. "Do you cook with your mom, Kylon?" I asked, refilling his water glass. "Sometimes," he nodded. "But she works late a lot. I'm pretty good at making sandwiches, though." "And your dad?" Callum asked casually, reaching for another piece of garlic bread. The question hung in the air for a second too long. Something in the atmosphere shifted, like the pressure change before a storm. Kylon looked directly at Callum, his fork paused halfway to his mouth. "That's you, isn't it?" he said, his voice suddenly smaller. "You come to our house sometimes. My mom says you're my dad, too."
The world stopped.
I felt the words like a physical blow. My hand froze on my glass. Jude's eyes widened, darting between his father and his new friend. And Callum. Callum's face drained of color so quickly I thought he might faint. "I think you're confused, buddy," Callum said after what felt like eternity. His laugh sounded hollow, forced. "I've never been to your house." Kylon frowned, clearly puzzled. "But you have. You don't stay long. Mom says not to bother you when you come." I forced my lips into a smile that felt like it might crack my face. "Kylon, honey, I think you might be mixing Mr. Winters up with someone else. These mix-ups happen sometimes." But even as I said it, I knew. The truth was written in Callum's rigid posture, in the way his knuckles whitened around his fork, in the slight tremor in his hand as he reached for his water. Kylon wasn't lying. Somehow we made it through dinner. I served ice cream. We talked about anything else. Kylon seemed to sense he'd said something wrong and retreated into shy politeness. Jude looked confused but followed our lead in changing subjects. And Callum performed normalcy with a desperate intensity that made my stomach turn. Later, after Kylon's mother had picked him up with a quick wave from the car, Callum tried to laugh it off. "Kids and their imaginations," he said, loading the dishwasher with mechanical movements. "Poor kids probably got some family issues. Projecting or something." I watched him. This man I'd shared a bed with for 15 years. He seemed pretty certain. Come on. You can't possibly think." He turned to me, eyes wide with manufactured innocence. "That's crazy." I've never seen that kid before in my life. But there had been something in Kylon's direct gaze. Something honest. And more damning, there had been recognition in Callum's eyes before he masked it. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay awake beside Callum, listening to his too even breathing, knowing he was faking sleep as much as I was. The ceiling fan turned in slow circles above us, casting shifting shadows. "Tell me the truth," I whispered finally. "Do you know that boy's mother?" His body tensed.
Jesus, Heloise.
"Let it go. Answer me."
No.
"I don't know his mother. I don't know him. This is insane." He turned away from me, pulling the covers tight. But the defensive edge in his voice told me everything his words didn't. The next morning, I asked Jude about Kylon while driving him to school. "He's really smart," Jude said, staring out the window. "Kind of quiet until you get to know him." I kept my eyes on the road. "Has he ever mentioned his father before?" Jude shifted uncomfortably. Kind of. A few weeks ago, he said something weird about how we might be related." I thought he was joking. My hands tightened on the steering wheel. What exactly did he say? Just that his mom told him his dad had another family. And that. Jude hesitated. That his dad looked like mine. I felt sick. "Why didn't you tell me?" Jude shrugged, suddenly looking very young. "I didn't think it was real, Mom. Kids say stuff sometimes." After dropping Jude off, I drove home in a daze. As I cleared the breakfast dishes, I found a paper that had slipped under the table, a drawing Kylon must have made while waiting for his mother. It showed 3 figures, a woman, a boy, and a man. The man was tall with sandy hair and glasses. He looked exactly like Callum. I sat down hard in the kitchen chair, the paper trembling in my hand. The careful detail in the man's face was unmistakable, the slight crook in his nose from a college rugby injury, the way his hair receded slightly at the temples. This wasn't imagination or coincidence. This was the moment I realized that my entire marriage might be built on lies. The next day, I called in sick to work for the first time in 3 years. As soon as Jude and Callum left the house, I drove to Westlake Middle School, where my son and Kylon attended 8th grade. My hands shook slightly as I parked, rehearsing what I'd say. The school secretary, Mrs. Dalton, had known me for years. Her smile was warm as I approached the front desk. "Eloise, this is a surprise. Is Jude all right?" "He's fine," I assured her, forcing a smile. Actually, I need to update some emergency contact information for a project I'm helping with. One of Jude's classmates, Kylon Thorne? His mother asked me to drop off some medications, but I realized I don't have her contact details. The lie tasted bitter, but I needed to know. Mrs. Dalton nodded sympathetically. Of course, dear. Let me pull that up. She clicked through her computer, then turned the screen slightly. There we go. Maribel Thorne. Should I write down her number for you? Maribel Thorne. The name hit me like a physical blow. I knew that name. 6 years ago, during my pregnancy with Jude, Callum's firm had hired a temporary assistant while his regular one was on maternity leave. Maribel Thorne. I'd met her once at a company Christmas party, a pretty woman with a quiet laugh who'd complimented my dress. Callum had barely introduced us before steering me toward his boss. That would be great, I managed to say, accepting the slip of paper with Maribel's phone number and address. On the drive home, memories surfaced like debris after a flood. Callum working late during those months. His distraction, his irritability. I'd attributed it to stress, to my difficult pregnancy.
What a fool I'd been.
Later that week, during school pickup, I noticed a woman chatting with Kylon in the parking lot. Not his mother, but an older woman who appeared to be a neighbor or a relative. As Jude ran to the car, I made a split-second decision. I'll be right back, I told him, and walked over to where Kylon was now alone, the woman having driven away. Hi, Kylon, I said gently. Waiting for your mom? He nodded, that same careful politeness in his expression. She sometimes runs late on Thursdays. She has a meeting. I saw you talking to someone just now. Oh, that's Mrs. Bennett. She lives next door to us. She gives me rides sometimes. I kept my voice casual. That's nice of her. Does she know your dad too? Something guarded entered Kylon's eyes. I don't think so. He doesn't come over much. But he does sometimes? I pressed. Before he could answer, a car horn honked. Maribel Thorne had arrived, waving at her son from a blue sedan. Kylon grabbed his backpack. I have to go. Bye, Mrs. Winters. As he ran to his mother's car, Mrs. Bennett returned from the school building where she'd apparently been signing out another child. I approached her with my most disarming smile. Hi there, I'm Eloise Winters, Jude's mom. I just saw you talking with Kylon. Our boys are friends. The older woman smiled. Oh, how nice. I'm Patricia Bennett. I live next door to the Thorns. Kylon's such a good boy. He really is, I agreed. Jude's enjoying having him over. I'm still getting to know him, though. Patricia's expression softened. It's not easy for that boy, you know. Single mom, dad in the picture, but not really there. Funny thing is, Kylon talks about his dad like he's someone really important. Some big-shot businessman, I gather. I spread through my veins. Is that so? MHM. Only sees him every few months from what I can tell. Shame, really. Boy needs a father figure. I thanked her and walked back to my car, legs unsteady beneath me. Callum was a manager at one of the city's largest financial firms. Important. A businessman. Exactly as she described. That night, after Jude went to bed, I went to our home office and opened an old laptop we rarely used anymore. Years ago, I'd backed up our emails to it during a computer switch. On a hunch, I searched for Maribel Thorne. The results made me physically ill. Dozens of emails between them, dating back 7 years. They started professional, became friendly, then flirtatious. Dinner plans. Inside jokes. The last ones from just over 6 years ago were vague about meeting places, filled with innuendos. They ended abruptly around the time I was 7 months pregnant with Jude. I printed several of the most damning emails and waited in the living room. When Callum came home from his client dinner, I didn't say a word, just handed him the stack of papers. He scanned the first page, his face passing through shock, anger, and finally settling into something hard and defensive. You went through my private emails? He demanded, voice rising. What the hell, Eloise? Kylon is your son, isn't he? My voice sounded strange to my own ears. Too calm, too detached. This is insane. You're overreacting to some ancient emails and a confused kid's fantasy. Answer the question, Callum. He threw the papers down. I don't have to justify myself to you. You're being paranoid, digging through years-old communications.
Is he your son?
Callum ran his hands through his hair, pacing the living room. I had a brief thing with her, okay? It was nothing. It was over before Jude was even born. That's not what I asked. His face contorted with frustration. What do you want me to say, Eloise? That I made a mistake?
Fine.
I made a mistake. But that doesn't mean I'm that kid's father. She probably sleeps around. It could be anyone's kid. The casual cruelty in his dismissal shocked me. This wasn't the man I thought I'd married. Get out of our bedroom, I said quietly. You can sleep in the guest room. You're being ridiculous. Get out, I shouted, surprising both of us with the force of my rage. The next morning, Callum tried a different approach. As I made coffee, he stood in the kitchen doorway, voice gentle and reasonable. Elle, listen to yourself. You're letting this woman manipulate you through her son. If she had any real claim, don't you think she would have come forward years ago? This is just some scheme to get money. I stared at him, seeing him clearly for perhaps the first time. Is that what you tell yourself? That she's manipulative? That the boy is lying? I'm thinking of our family, he insisted. Of Jude. Do you really want to blow up his world over this? You already did that, I said. The moment you cheated. The moment you potentially fathered a child and abandoned him. His face darkened. You have no proof of anything. Then you won't mind if I talk to Maribel directly. The flash of panic in his eyes told me everything. That afternoon, I drove to the address Mrs. Dalton had given me. It was a small apartment complex on the other side of town, clean but modest. Nothing like our 4-bedroom house in the suburbs. I sat in my car for 20 minutes, gathering courage, before finally walking to Unit 14B and knocking. The door opened, and there she was, Maribel Thorne. Older than in my memory, with tired lines around her eyes, but still beautiful. She wore scrubs, perhaps just home from a nursing shift. Her eyes widened in recognition. Eloise. Just that. No question about why I was there. No surprise, really. Just quiet resignation. Is Kylon my husband's son? I asked, my voice barely steady. She looked at me for a long moment, then stepped back from the doorway. You'd better come in. The apartment was small but neat, with school books on the table and a child's artwork on the refrigerator. Kylon wasn't home. At a friend's house, Maribel explained. I never wanted this to happen, she said, sitting across from me at her kitchen table. I told Kylon not to mention Callum if they ever met. But he's at that age where he's asking more questions, wanting to understand. So it's true, I whispered. Maribel nodded slowly. Callum and I, it started as just flirting. Then more. When I found out I was pregnant, he panicked. Said he couldn't leave you, you were expecting to. He swore he'd help financially, but that no one could know. And you agreed to that? I couldn't keep the judgment from my voice. Her eyes flashed. I didn't have many options. I was a single woman, pregnant, with no family support. And Callum. She hesitated. He made it clear there would be consequences if I didn't agree. Consequences? She stood and retrieved her phone. After scrolling for a moment, she handed it to me. I saved these all these years, in case I ever needed protection. It was a saved voicemail from Callum, dated 6 years ago. If you think about going public with this, I'll make things very difficult for you. My firm has excellent lawyers. Think about what's best for everyone, Maribel. His voice was cold, calculating, nothing like the warm tone he used at home. I felt physically ill. There are more, Maribel said quietly. He would send money every few months. Cash, no paper trail. It was never regular enough. Sometimes I had to beg. When did he last see Kylon? I asked, my throat tight. 3 months ago. He comes by maybe 4 times a year. Stays for an hour. Barely talks to him. Her eyes met mine, filled with a mixture of sadness and determination. Kylon deserves better than that. Yes, I said, he does. As I drove home, the full reality of my situation crashed over me. My husband wasn't just unfaithful, he was cruel, manipulative, possibly dangerous. The man who held me each night had threatened a pregnant woman into silence, had abandoned his own child while playing devoted father to another. And I had never suspected a thing. The next morning, I called in sick again and drove to see Patricia Nguyen, a lawyer friend from my book club. I didn't tell her everything, just that my marriage was over and I needed to protect myself and Jude. Separation first, she advised. Document everything. Don't confront him until we have all the paperwork ready. I nodded, feeling oddly calm. The shock had given way to a strange clarity. For 2 days, I went through the motions at home. I cooked dinner. I helped Jude with homework. I slept in the master bedroom while Callum remained in the guest room, our temporary arrangement becoming something more permanent. We were like actors in a play, going through the motions of a family while the foundation crumbled beneath us. On Friday afternoon, my phone rang, Maribel's number flashing on the screen. "Kylon's gone," she said, her voice tight with panic. "He didn't come home from school. I've called everyone." "I'll help look," I said immediately. "Have you called the police?" "They say he hasn't been missing long enough." "Eloise, he's never done this before." An hour later, my doorbell rang. I opened it to find Kylon standing on my porch, backpack clutched to his chest, eyes red-rimmed. "Kylon, your mother is worried sick," I said, ushering him inside. "Mom was crying," he said, his voice small. "After you visited. I heard her on the phone with someone. She was upset. I didn't want to be there." I called Maribel immediately, assuring her Kylon was safe. While we waited for her to arrive, I made hot chocolate and sat with him at the kitchen table. "I'm sorry about all this," I said gently. "Adult problems are complicated sometimes." He looked up at me, eyes too wise for his 13 years. "Are you mad at my mom?"
No, honey.
"I'm not mad at your mom at all. Are you mad at me?" My heart broke a little. "Absolutely not. None of this is your fault, Kylon. Not one bit of it." He studied his mug. "Is he really my dad? Jude's dad?" I took a deep breath. "I think so. But that doesn't change that your mom loves you very much. And it doesn't change that Jude thinks you're pretty great." When Maribel arrived, tearfully embracing her son, I suggested something unconventional, that Kylon stay for dinner, and that she join us. After initial hesitation, she agreed. We had an awkward but necessary conversation, establishing boundaries and truths. "Jude will be home from his after-school program soon," I told them. "I think the boys should spend time together, if that's okay with you." Maribel nodded slowly. "I think that would be good for Kylon." When Jude arrived home, his face lit up seeing Kylon there. They disappeared into Jude's room, soon lost in discussions about video games and school projects. The easy friendship between them, half-brothers who had found each other by chance, made my eyes sting with tears. Maribel and I sat in the living room, talking in low voices. "I never wanted to disrupt your family," she said. "I just wanted Callum to be a real father to Kylon." "You haven't disrupted anything that wasn't already built on lies," I replied. "And Kylon deserves better than occasional visits from a man who won't even acknowledge him publicly." By the time Callum's car pulled into the driveway that evening, Maribel and I had reached an understanding. We weren't friends, there was too much complicated history, but we were allies in something important. Callum froze in the doorway, his eyes darting from me to Maribel, then to Kylon who had emerged from Jude's room. "What the hell is this?" he demanded, his voice dangerously low. "The boys are having a play date," I said calmly. "Maribel and I have been having a lovely chat." His face contorted with rage. "In my house? You brought them into my house." "Our house," I corrected. "And yes, I did. Because we're all going to deal with this like adults." "There's nothing to deal with," he shouted, making Kylon flinch. The boy retreated behind Maribel, his eyes wide with fear. That's when I really knew, I was doing the right thing. "Jude, take Kylon back to your room, please," I said, my voice steady. Once they were gone, I turned back to Callum. "I want a divorce." The words hung in the air between us. Callum's face went through a kaleidoscope of emotions, shock, anger, calculation, and finally, a cold smile. You're overreacting. As usual. He turned to Maribel.
And you.
I should have known you'd try something like this eventually. What is it you want? More money? Maribel stood straighter. I want you to be a father to your son. A real one. I've given you plenty, he hissed. More than you deserve. Enough, I said. Maribel and Kylon are leaving now. You and I will discuss this later. Alone. After they left, with plans for Jude to visit them the following weekend, Callum's rage exploded. You had no right, he shouted, pacing our living room. No right to go behind my back. To bring them here. And you had no right to father a child and abandon him. I replied. No right to threaten his mother. No right to lie to me for 7 years. I didn't abandon anyone. I paid her, didn't I? More than most men would. His utter lack of remorse chilled me. This man, this stranger, was not the Callum I thought I'd married. Or perhaps he always had been, and I'd been too blind to see it. Get out, I said quietly. Pack a bag and leave. My lawyer will contact yours. He stepped toward me, his face twisted with fury. You think you can just throw me out of my own house? After everything I've done for you and Jude? I didn't back down. If you don't leave willingly, I'll call the police. And then I'll tell them about the threatening voicemails you left for Maribel. I'm sure they'd be very interested. Something in my voice must have convinced him I was serious. He stormed upstairs, threw some clothes in a duffel bag, and left, but not before delivering a final threat. You'll regret this, Eloise. I'll make sure of it. The slamming door echoed through the house. In Jude's room, I heard a sudden silence, then the muffled sound of my son crying. I gave him space for a few minutes, then knocked gently. Hey, I said, sitting on the edge of his bed. I know this is a lot. Jude wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. Dad's not coming back, is he?
No, honey.
Not to live here. Because of Kylon? I chose my words carefully. Because of choices your dad made a long time ago. None of this is Kylon's fault. Jude was quiet for a moment. Is Kylon really my brother? Half-brother, yes. It seems that way. To my surprise, a small smile tugged at Jude's lips. That's kind of cool, actually. I always wanted a brother. The simple acceptance in my son's words broke something open inside me. I pulled him close, marveling at how children could sometimes navigate complex emotional terrain with more grace than adults. The next morning, my phone was flooded with text messages from Callum, alternating between rage, self-pity, and manipulation. By afternoon, there was a voicemail so threatening that Patricia advised me to file for a temporary restraining order. He's escalating, she warned. We need to protect you and Jude. 3 days later, Callum's mask fell completely. He showed up at Jude's school, demanding to see him. When the principal refused based on the temporary order, he caused such a scene that several teachers witnessed his rage. At his office, he told colleagues I was mentally unstable, inventing stories about him, but his behavior grew so erratic that people began to question his version of events. Then an administrative assistant at his firm came forward, revealing that Callum had made unwanted advances toward her last year. 2 more women followed with similar stories. The polished, professional image he'd cultivated for years cracked beyond repair. Meanwhile, with my support, Maribel filed for formal child support and back payments. Her lawyer presented evidence of Callum's paternity and his years of inadequate, under-the-table payments. The court date was set for the following month. Callum's firm placed him on leave pending investigations into his conduct. His carefully constructed life was unraveling thread by thread. Through it all, something unexpected happened. Kylon and Jude grew closer. They had sleepovers at both houses. They discovered shared interests in astronomy and graphic novels. They talked for hours, comparing notes on the man who was their father, but who had been 2 entirely different people to each of them. One evening, as I sat on my back porch watching the sunset, I felt a strange sense of peace wash over me. Not happiness. I was far from happy about the situation, but a quiet strength I hadn't known I possessed. I had faced the ugliest truth of my life. I had stood up to the man who betrayed me, I had chosen integrity over comfortable lies. And somehow, in the midst of all this brokenness, new bonds were forming. New truths were emerging. New strength was growing. My marriage was over. My illusions were shattered. But I was still standing in the rubble, ready to build something honest from the broken pieces. The therapist's office had soft blue walls and plants in every corner. Dr. Eleanor Barnes was in her 50s with kind eyes and a direct manner I appreciated. This was our third session, Jude's and mine. Family therapy, they called it, though our family had been redefined in ways I never imagined. "How are you feeling this week, Jude?" Dr. Barnes asked. My son sat beside me on the comfortable couch, fidgeting with the zipper of his hoodie. At 13, he was still growing into his lanky frame, but there was something different about him lately, a straightening of his shoulders, a quiet confidence emerging from the chaos. "Better, I guess," he said. "Dad called yesterday." I tried not to stiffen visibly. The restraining order prevented Callum from coming to our home, but it allowed supervised phone calls with Jude. "And how was that?" Dr. Barnes asked. Jude shrugged. "Weird." He kept saying things like, "when this all blows over and when I come home." Like it's just temporary. Dr. Barnes glanced at me, then back to Jude. "What do you think about that?" "I think he's lying to himself," Jude said simply. "Mom's not taking him back. And I wouldn't want her to." The fierce protectiveness in his voice brought tears to my eyes. Dr. Barnes nodded thoughtfully. "Jude, you've been spending time with Kylon regularly now. How's that relationship developing?" A small smile appeared. "It's good. He's teaching me to skateboard. I'm helping him with math." He paused. "Last weekend, he had a nightmare at our house. He was crying." "That must have been difficult to see," Dr. Barnes said. Jude nodded. "I woke Mom up. She sat with him until he fell back asleep. He told her he used to have them all the time, dreams where someone was shouting." His eyes met mine. "It was Dad shouting, wasn't it? In his dreams." I swallowed hard. "Probably, yes." "He hasn't had any nightmares at our house since that night," Jude said, a hint of pride in his voice. "Mom says it's because he feels safe now." On the drive home, Jude asked the question I'd been dreading. "Mom, if Dad really is Kylon's father, does that mean he cheated on you?" I gripped the steering wheel tighter, careful to keep my voice steady. "Yes, honey, that's what it means." "While you were pregnant with me?" My throat tightened. "Yes." Jude was quiet for so long I thought the conversation might be over. Then, in a small voice, "I'm sorry." I glanced at him, confused. "What are you sorry for?" "I don't know. That it happened. That you're sad." I pulled a car into a grocery store parking lot and turned to face my son fully. "Listen to me, Jude. None of this, absolutely none of it, is your fault. And yes, I'm sad sometimes. But I'm also proud of how brave you've been, of how kind you've been to Kylon." He nodded, blinking back tears. "Can we still have Kylon over this weekend?" "Of course we can." That weekend, Maribel dropped Kylon off at our house on Friday evening. The boys disappeared upstairs immediately, eager to continue some complex Lego project they'd been working on. Maribel lingered at the door, looking tired but somehow lighter than when we'd first confronted the truth together. "He hasn't stopped talking about coming here all week," she said with a small smile. "It's the highlight of his life right now." "Jude's too," I admitted. "They're good for each other." An awkward silence fell between us. We weren't friends, not really, but we were connected now by something powerful. "The hearing is next week," Maribel said finally. "For the child support." I nodded. "My lawyer says the evidence is overwhelming. The DNA test results were clear." Callum's lawyer reached out yesterday. Offered a settlement. Her dark eyes held mine. "I'm not taking it. It's not just about the money. It's about him acknowledging Kylon publicly." "You're doing the right thing," I said. "For what it's worth." After she left, I made the boys their favorite dinner, spaghetti and meatballs with garlic bread. As we ate, I watched them joke and laugh together, finishing each other's sentences like they'd known each other their entire lives. Their easy bond made my heart ache in a bittersweet way. Later that night, I heard them talking in Jude's room when they were supposed to be sleeping. Does your mom ever cry? Kylon asked quietly. Sometimes, Jude replied. Mostly in the shower where she thinks I can't hear. Mine too. Do you think they'll be okay? I think they're really strong, Kylon said. Stronger than my dad. He's my dad too, Jude reminded him.
Yeah.
But we don't have to be like him. The wisdom in their young voices brought tears to my eyes. I walked quietly back to my bedroom, leaving them to their brotherhood. 2 weeks later, the child support hearing changed everything. Callum's lawyer tried to paint Maribel as opportunistic, but the evidence was damning. The DNA test, the threatening voicemails, the irregular cash payments. When Callum took the stand, his carefully constructed facade crumbled under cross-examination. He admitted to knowing about Kylon since birth. Admitted to the threats. Admitted to everything. The judge's ruling was decisive. Substantial monthly child support payments, plus years of back payments to be made in installments. Outside the courthouse, Callum confronted me, his face twisted with rage. Are you happy now? He snarled. You've ruined everything. I looked at this man, this stranger I'd once loved, and felt nothing but a distant pity.
No, Callum.
You did that yourself. That night, I received a text from Maribel. He's gone. Packed up his apartment and left town. His lawyer says he's relocating to Arizona. I stared at the message for a long time. Callum had run away rather than face the consequences of his actions. Part of me wasn't surprised. He'd always chosen the easy way out. When I told Jude his father had left town, he was quiet for a moment. Will he call me from Arizona? He asked finally. I don't know, honey. That's up to him. Jude nodded slowly. It's okay if he doesn't. I still have you. And Kylon. 2 months after Callum's departure, I sat at my kitchen table late one night, unable to sleep. On an impulse, I opened my laptop and created a blog. I titled it Rebuilding, Life After Betrayal, and began to write anonymously about my experience. About the shock, the grief, the rage. About learning to trust my instincts again. About watching my son form a bond with his half-brother that transcended the ugliness of their connection. I didn't expect anyone to read it. It was just a way to process my feelings, to pour out the thoughts that kept me awake at night. But somehow people found it. Comments appeared, other women who had experienced similar betrayals, who were trying to rebuild their lives from the ashes of broken trust. As spring turned to summer, new traditions emerged in our reconfigured family life. Sunday pancake breakfasts became a ritual, with Kylon often spending the weekend at our house. Saturday movie nights where the boys took turns choosing films. Maribel and I developed a careful friendship built on mutual respect and shared purpose, giving our son stability and love in the aftermath of chaos. Jude changed too. He became more expressive, less guarded. One evening, as we cleaned up after dinner, he suddenly hugged me tight. I'm proud of you, Mom, he whispered. I held him close, tears springing to my eyes. What for, buddy? For being brave. For not letting Dad hurt us anymore. For making Kylon feel like he belongs somewhere. That night, I cried in my bedroom, not from sadness this time, but from something that felt almost like healing. I had thought the worst thing about this ordeal was discovering my husband's betrayal. But I had been wrong. The worst thing had been how long I had allowed myself to believe that his half-truths and manipulations were all I deserved. Now, sitting in the quiet of a house that felt more like home than it ever had with Callum in it, I realized something important. I was no longer just surviving this crisis. I was beginning to thrive. 8 months after Kylon's innocent revelation at our dinner table, my anonymous blog went viral. A popular women's magazine had discovered it and featured an excerpt in their monthly issue. Suddenly, my inbox was flooded with messages from women across the country, women who had faced similar betrayals, who were struggling to rebuild their lives, who found hope in my words. Your story gave me courage to leave my cheating husband after 15 years, one woman wrote. I didn't think I could start over at 42, but if you can do it, so can I. I sat in my home office, staring at the screen in disbelief. What had begun as personal therapy had somehow become a lifeline for others. The responsibility felt enormous. That same week, I received an email from Olivia Walsh at Beacon Press, a small but respected publishing house specializing in memoirs and self-help books. "Your blog speaks to so many women who have experienced betrayal and gaslighting," she wrote. "We would be interested in discussing the possibility of expanding it into a full-length memoir." My finger hovered over the delete button. Could I really expose my life, our lives, that way? Even anonymously, a book felt more permanent, more significant than a blog. That evening, I called Maribel. Our relationship had evolved into something neither of us could have predicted. Not quite friendship, but a deep alliance forged in shared experience. "They want me to write a book," I told her, "about everything that happened." Silence hung on the line for a moment. "Would you use our real names?" "No, of course not. Everything would be changed to protect the boys." She sighed. "Part of me wants to say no, to keep all this private. But then I think about other women out there living with men like Callum. Women who might find strength in your story." I thought about it for days, turning the offer over in my mind. Finally, I replied to Olivia with a single word: yes. 3 months of intense writing followed. I poured everything onto the page. The moment of revelation at our dinner table, the investigation that uncovered years of lies, the painful rebuilding of a life I never expected to lead. I wrote about the boys' growing bond, about Maribel's courage, about my own journey from devastation to determination. The day I submitted the final manuscript was the same day I received an invitation to speak at a women's conference about rebuilding after betrayal. The organizer had been following my blog and thought my perspective would resonate with attendees. Public speaking had never been my forte. I was a literature teacher, comfortable in a classroom, but not on a stage. Yet something about the invitation felt right. It was time to step out of the shadows, to own my story in a new way. The conference room was packed with women of all ages. As I stepped up to the podium, my hands trembling slightly, I caught sight of Maribel sitting in the back row. She had insisted on coming, a silent show of support that meant more than she knew. "My talk today is called, 'When the Man You Love Is a Lie.'" I began, my voice steadier than I expected. "It's about what happens when the foundation of your life turns out to be built on deception. But more importantly, it's about what you build in its place." For the next 40 minutes, I spoke from the heart, no notes, no prepared speech. Just raw truth about loss, betrayal, and the unexpected strength that can emerge from brokenness. When I finished, the room erupted in applause. Women lined up afterward to share their own stories, to thank me for giving voice to experiences they had suffered in silence. As spring turned to summer, Maribel launched a support network for single mothers who had been abandoned by their children's fathers. She called it Left Behind, Moving Forward, and asked me to help with the organizational structure. Together, we created a space where women could find practical resources, legal advice, and emotional support. The boys continued to thrive in their unconventional brotherhood. Jude won first place in his school's art competition with a striking painting of 2 trees growing from the same roots, but branching in different directions. Kylon gave a speech at his school assembly about courage, bringing tears to the eyes of his teachers. One warm evening in July, we celebrated Kylon's 14th birthday with a backyard barbecue. Maribel and I worked side by side in the kitchen, preparing food while the boys set up tables outside. As I carried out the cake, chocolate with blue frosting, Kylon's favorite, I saw tears in Maribel's eyes. "What's wrong?" I asked quietly. She shook her head, smiling through her tears. "Nothing's wrong. It's just look at him. I've never seen him this happy." Across the yard, Kylon was laughing with Jude and some school friends, his face relaxed and open in a way it hadn't been when I first met him. Gone was the careful, watchful boy who had entered our lives with an innocent truth that shattered everything. In August, a letter arrived from the prosecutor's office in Arizona. Callum had been arrested for tax evasion and failure to comply with court-ordered payments. He was facing significant fines and possible jail time. I showed the letter to Maribel, but decided not to tell the boys. Their healing shouldn't be tied to Callum's punishment. That fall, Jude's English teacher assigned an essay titled My Hero. I found the finished paper on his desk one evening while putting away laundry. The first line caught my eye. My mom is the strongest person I know. She taught me you don't have to stay where you're not respected. I set the paper down, my vision blurred with tears. All the struggle, all the pain. If it had taught my son this essential truth, perhaps it had been worth it. In November, exactly 1 year after my book contract was signed, I received my first advance check. It wasn't a fortune, but it was enough for a down payment on a small house in a neighborhood with good schools. A fresh start in a place that had only our memories, not Callum's. The day we moved in, Jude insisted on painting his bedroom immediately. The color he chose was a deep blue that matched the night sky. On one wall, he painted a mural in white. Family isn't what you're born with. It's who stays when the truth shows up. That night, Kylon stayed over, his room ready with a twin bed and desk of his own. As I tucked him in, a habit that had developed naturally over the past year, he wrapped his arms around my neck in a spontaneous hug. "I hope my dad never comes back," he whispered. "But I'm glad I came here." I held him close, this boy who had inadvertently changed the course of all our lives. "I'm glad too, Kylon. So glad." As I closed his door softly, I realized how much had changed in a single year. I had lost a husband but gained something far more valuable: truth, strength, and a family bound not by lies but by choice. 1 year later, I stood in my kitchen, morning light streaming through windows I had chosen, warming a home I had built with my own strength. Coffee brewed in the pot as I prepared breakfast, the familiar sounds of Jude and Kylon laughing in the backyard filtering through the open door. Kylon was spending the weekend with us, as he did every other weekend now. At 15, both boys were growing taller by the day, their voices deepening, their personalities solidifying into the men they would someday become. Jude, artistic and thoughtful. Kylon, analytical and kind.
Mom.
"Look at this," Jude called. I stepped onto the back porch to see them proudly displaying a small wooden bench they had built together, their latest project. "We thought it could go under the apple tree," Kylon explained, gesturing to the young tree I'd planted when we moved in. "For when it gets bigger." "It's perfect," I said, meaning it. The bench was uneven and roughly finished, but it was made with care and collaboration like everything in our lives now. That evening, I would host my book release party at a local bookstore. Rebuilding, Finding Strength After Betrayal, had finally hit the shelves, and while it wasn't a bestseller, it had found its audience. Women who needed to hear that survival was possible. That betrayal didn't have to be the end of their story. As I got ready that night, choosing a simple blue dress and silver earrings Jude had given me for Christmas, I thought about how far we'd come. The early days after Callum's departure had been brutal, filled with legal battles, financial stress, and nights when I'd cried until there were no tears left. But gradually, like a garden after winter, new life had emerged from the frozen ground of our pain. The bookstore was packed with familiar faces. Maribel stood near the refreshment table, chatting with women from our support circle, a monthly gathering we now co-hosted at a local community center. Dr. Barnes, our former therapist, had come to show her support. Teachers from the boys' school. Neighbors who had helped during the darkest days. As I signed copies of my book, meeting the eyes of women who had found comfort in my words, I felt a sense of purpose I'd never experienced before. My pain had become a bridge to others. My story had become a light guiding women out of their own darkness. "I read your blog when I was trying to leave my husband," one woman whispered as I signed her book. "I didn't think I was strong enough until I saw that you had done it." "You were always strong enough," I told her. "Sometimes we just need someone to remind us." 2 weeks later, my mother visited, her first time seeing our new home. Our relationship had been strained since the divorce. She'd grown up in an era where women stayed no matter what, where family reputation mattered more than personal happiness. "It's lovely," she said, running her hand along the kitchen counter. I'd refinished myself. "You've done well, Eloise." Later, as we sat on the porch watching the boys shoot baskets in the driveway, she turned to me with tears in her eyes. "I'm sorry," she said quietly, "for suggesting you should have tried harder to keep your family together." I was wrong. I took her hand, feeling decades of expectations and judgments dissolve between us. You wanted what you thought was best for me, I said. But this is what was truly best. That spring, I noticed something changing in myself, a willingness to open up again, to see possibilities I'd thought were closed forever. It began with simple conversations with David, the owner of the local bookstore. Nothing dramatic, just a shared laugh over a coffee recommendation, a discussion about favorite authors, a lingering goodbye after a reading. I wasn't ready for a relationship. Might not be for a very long time. But for the first time since Callum's betrayal, I could imagine a future where someone else might stand beside me, someone honest, someone kind. One evening, as rain pattered against the windows, I sat on my covered porch with a cup of tea. The boys were inside playing video games, their animated voices carrying through the open window. I watched raindrops gather on the leaves of my garden, listened to the soothing rhythm of water on the roof. In the distance, a rainbow appeared, faint at first, then stronger, arching across the clearing sky. I thought about how rainbows required both rain and sunshine, how they couldn't exist without the storm that preceded them. My life was like that now. Beautiful not despite the storm, but because I had weathered it. When New Year's Eve arrived, I decided to start a new tradition. The boys were spending the night with friends, so I had the house to myself. I built a small fire in the backyard fire pit, then took out a notepad and began to write. Not resolutions for the coming year, but acknowledgments of what I had survived in the years before. I was lied to. I was betrayed. I was gaslit and manipulated. I was forced to rebuild my life from scratch. I was scared. I was broken. When the list was complete, I tore out the page and folded it carefully. Then I placed it in the fire, watching the flames consume each word. Not to forget, never to forget, but to transform the pain into something else, into fuel for the life I was still creating. As midnight approached, I wrapped a blanket around my shoulders and looked up at the star-filled sky. In the distance, fireworks began to bloom, celebrating the turn of the year. I was lied to, betrayed, and broken, I whispered to the night. But I was never powerless. I just had to remember who I was without him. The last firework faded, leaving only stars in its wake. I smiled, feeling a profound sense of peace wash over me. This was the life I had chosen. Not the one I was promised, but the one I had built from truth and courage. And it was enough. More than enough. It was everything. What would you sacrifice to protect your dignity when the life you built reveals itself as a beautiful lie? If this story resonated with you, like and subscribe for more tales of women who discovered their strength in the aftermath of betrayal.